Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Robert Bell. I'm a product-enabled specialist in NetApp, and together with my colleague Luba. Luba, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everybody, and hello, Robert. I'm Luba Weisberg, and I'm a product solution architect at NetApp.
So Luba and I will be giving this session today, and the topic of this session is optimizing costs and performance with Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. It's not going to be a very long session, but I hope it will be interesting because we really want to cover one of the most, I think, important topics around deploying workloads in AWS, which is cost and performance. I'm going to start off by showing some slides with examples of some of the features that are critical for this area. And then we're going to go into a demo, which will be run by Luba, which will actually show how these um, features and capabilities really play in action in the real world. So what I would like to do is, first of all, encourage you to ask questions. We want it to be as interactive as possible. So there's a Q&A section in the Zoom, which you can use to ask questions, and really simple questions, complex questions, whatever it is, anything that comes to mind. We'd be happy to answer, and really, it's good to take advantage of the time we have here. Um, we will answer, we'll have a Q&A session at the very end of this webinar, but even if there's something you want to ask during, we can actually get you the answer during the session so that you'll have a clearer understanding of the topics we're talking about. So there is the questions, and also we're going to be asking you some questions. So for example, I'd like to start off with a poll. So what you will see on your screen is a question that will appear, and this question is, have you heard of Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP before this webinar? And then you can answer whether you're familiar with it, whether you've heard about it and don't know much, or if it's your first time hearing about it. We'd be happy to hear your answers because this will also help us adapt what we're showing to your level of knowledge. So please click on the right answer, and then we will be able to share the overall results. It's completely anonymous, so we're not going to judge you if you answered, and there's no correct answer either. So I'm waiting for the answers to come in. And yes, okay, this is interesting. So I think that the majority of the people here have heard about it, but don't know much about it. Some are very familiar, and some it's the first time. So that's actually a good mix because I'm going to be introducing some of the features of FSx for ONTAP. I won't go into too much detail, so it won't be overwhelming, but I think it will be good to know that these features exist. And sort of just to get everyone oriented, for those that do know FSx for ONTAP and those who don't, um, it is an intelligent storage service for AWS workloads. So if you're building workloads on AWS, you need to put your data somewhere, and there are multiple services, storage services where you can put your data. And one of them is called FSx for NetApp ONTAP. The reason it has NetApp ONTAP in the name is because it's based on technology that was developed by NetApp, which is called ONTAP. This is something that's been around for decades, and this is really one of the main storage operating systems that is used on premises. And really, many enterprises actually use this on premises and have been using it over years. This was adapted to AWS Cloud so that the same set of features could be provided natively in the cloud. So it's slightly different from the typical storage services you get in the cloud, which is usually just a simple storage service. If we look at S3, for example, it's a place where you can put your data. You put objects in an S3 bucket, and it does have some features, but it's basically just about storing the data and making it accessible. When it comes to FSx for ONTAP, then there's a lot more under the hood. There's this complex mechanism that is constantly operating to optimize the way the data is stored so that it can fit different types of workloads. So it's about how the data is accessed, which is very flexible, and the resilience and protection, which is something that is built into the storage. You don't have to add it as an internal external service, but you can actually get the storage service itself to protect the data. There is also data security like ransomware protection and cost and performance, obviously, which is why we're here today, and data mobility, which is about really moving the data around in a flexible way. So this is a lot of features, and we do have a series of these webinars, and each time we focus on a different area. And this session is around cost and performance. I do want to say that often the most important thing for companies when they are deploying workloads in AWS is usually around data security and protection, because that's really the number one thing you want to make sure of. If you're migrating from on-premises to the cloud, you want to have the same level of security, and you're not going to move data from one place to another place if it's not as secure and protected as it was. So that is usually the top priority. And then there are other things that might be requirements like availability. But at the end of the day, if you deployed something and the cost is too high and the performance is no good, then it's really something that is going to cause a lot of trouble. So whether it's at the initial planning stage or whether it's later on in the deployment, we often find that customers that we talk to, they have reached this situation where it's just costing too much. The bill at the end of the month is too high, or the performance is just not what they required. So this is why it's very important to understand what the capabilities are when it comes to cost and performance and whether there's the flexibility that you need. So that's now this session is about that. And I do want to introduce, besides FSx for ONTAP, another system which is called Workload Factory. This is a orchestration tool that was developed by NetApp, which really what it does, it's a set of tools that help you deploy your infrastructure according to best practices. So there's this well-architected framework in AWS which defines how you can deploy things optimally for security, for operational efficiency, cost performance, sustainability. All of these things are documented as best practices, but it's quite complex to really be up to date with all of this information. So Workload Factory is a tool that kind of like knows all of the best practices, and it gives you an easy way to deploy things instead of being an expert on how to deploy databases with high performance or how to deploy um, file shares in a way that is cost effective. It does that for you. You just choose the workload and the type of workload, and you choose the kind of priorities that you have, and it does a lot of the work behind the scenes. So it does that in the planning, deployment, and operations stage. The reason I'm introducing this is because we're going to be using Workload Factory to demonstrate FSx for ONTAP, because that really does show where these features that are related to cost and performance really are important at which stages whether you're planning, deploying, or operating. So let's look at how FSx for ONTAP helps improve cost and performance. And this is something that it could be as a replacement for a different type of storage, or even if you've deployed a system and then it's not optimal, how you can, on an ongoing basis, improve the cost and performance. So this is something that we found is really it's quite a major factor for a lot of the customers. And in fact, there are customers that after just talking to them about how successful, whether the deployment was successful, they do mention that the benefits they got from using FSx for ONTAP have been saving money, which is really because of some of the features that really help lower the bill, like storage efficiencies, which I'll mention in a moment, but also improving latency, like shortening the latency, speeding up the EDA job completion, for example, at ARM, and not only reducing cost, but improving productivity. Because if you're reducing costs but making performance work worse, then you're not really achieving anything. But if you can reduce costs and improve performance, obviously that's a huge benefit. And this is something that I think thanks to the many, many years of development that was invested in ONTAP, it is something that is able to do that. So I'll give you some examples of the features, and we'll sort of see them. Like I said, it's a short session, so not in full detail, but at least for to get an idea. There are storage efficiencies. So storage efficiencies is around how you store data. You've got a certain amount of data, there's bits and bytes, whatever, and you need to put them in storage. But there are ways of using less storage, putting more information in less storage, which is something that ONTAP does. It does it while maintaining high performance. So it doesn't do that and slow down. It does it and it manages to keep the same performance for that. There's also the tiering data. Data is, well, has different nature. There's data that you use frequently, and there's data that just lies around and you don't really need it. And you're probably familiar with that even on your own personal laptops. If you look at all the files that you have there, some of them you're going to be using on a daily basis, and some of them you're not going to touch for years. So multi-tiered architecture lets you take the data that's not being used intelligently. You identify which data is not required and putting that in storage, which costs a lot less, and that can really reduce the costs. And then on the performance side, there is the scalability. Performance is something that, well, the requirements can change over time. And you make a prediction based on the kind of usage that you think, if it's a high performance computing, you have certain benchmarks for that. But if it's a database, you might not necessarily know what the required performance is. And you might want to set something, but then fine tune it over time. So if people are saying, hey, the performance is not fast enough, you can boost it. Or if you're looking and monitoring the system and seeing that you've over provisioned the performance, you can lower that and save costs. And that's really where the final point here is optimizing, balancing between the costs and performance. And this is something that FSx for ONTAP really excels at. It gives you the ability to fine tune things. So you're not deciding anything in advance. There are certain services where you have to choose a certain tier, and then you're on that tier, and whether you're using it for the full capacity or on performance or not, you're going to have to be paying for it anyway. And then that can be a problem. With FSx for ONTAP, you can change everything. So it's about balancing, it's about having the flexibility to change. So I'm going to go over each of these features, like I said, not in too much detail, in that we're going to send you resources that you can read about these in much more detail. But just to give you like an idea. So storage efficiencies, like I said, it's about taking data and putting it in less space. So deduplication, for example, here I'm revealing all of our secrets, how we do this. So for example, there are certain blocks of data which are similar, and this happens a lot in if you think about user data, there are a lot of things where, you could have multiple copies of a presentation where some of the slides are the same, or just something that is repetitive throughout the data. If you scan it, you can find a lot of these similarities. And instead of storing this A block 3 times, we store it once. This is sometimes significant, and you can get a lot of cost reduction there. There is compression. Well, that's just basically zipping the information so it takes up less space. And compaction, this is more about the sort of under the hood, making sure that the blocks of data are compacted, that there's no empty, unnecessary overhead in the stream of data. So that saves space, it saves network connectivity. The next feature is the thin provisioning. And this is something I didn't really mention before, but it's about the ability to over provision. So really what you do here is that you provision with FSx for ONTAP, you provision volumes, you provision like a storage environment for a user, but you can over provision because you don't pay for the storage you're provisioning, you pay for the storage that you're using. So you can give users more capacity than you actually plan to use. And then when they start using the data, they can be allocated less. Typically, people will ask for a lot more capacity than they actually are going to use. So if you follow everyone's requests and give them all the capacity they're asking for, you're going to be paying a lot of money and they're not going to be using that storage. So as an admin, a storage admin, you can do this where you can really split the storage that you think is actually necessary between people, and you can over provision without it causing any problem. So this is really another way of saving money, which you can't really do on things like EBS. Oh yeah, just maybe a point that I didn't mention. You don't have to worry about the data running out because you can configure automatic capacity growth. So if the capacity that you did provision and you're paying that you did purchase and you're paying for, if that runs out, then you can automatically increase that. Then there's the snapshots, and this is something, well, when I joined NetApp, I heard about these snapshots and I just couldn't understand because it says, well, these snapshots are created, but they don't take up any space, or they take up a tiny, tiny bit of space. I just couldn't understand how that could be possible. How can you have information without taking up storage? But it turns out it is real and it does work, and it's done with these intelligent pointers to data and all sorts of things that were really developed by pretty smart people. And essentially, what you can do is you can create multiple snapshots of data, which you can then restore. And if something happens, if the data is corrupted or something happens, you want to like fall back to a previous version of the data of a file. You can just do that and it works. And the amount of overhead it creates is really minimal. So this creates a situation where you don't have to worry about overprotecting. You can do snapshots as very, very frequently, but it doesn't really use up your storage resources. It doesn't cost you a lot of money. There's also, because it's so fast, it is very high performance. Now, there is also clones, which are basically snapshots that separate from their parent. Snapshots are tied to a specific volume, and then in the case of a clone, it is independent. So it's like creating a clone of your environment, and it's independent. You can read and write, and it won't influence the parent volume. This is really good for if you're in a development environment and you want to do lots of multiple tests in parallel. You can duplicate the storage system. And again, because it's based on the snapshots, it's minimal impact on costs. Okay, like I said, I'm skipping through a little bit just because this is something that I encourage you if you are interested to watch. We have videos about this, and we have a lot of information about this. Now there's the tiering. So this is where I said the data that's frequently used is on the primary storage tier, which is SSD. It's very fast, very performant, but it does cost. And then there's the capacity pool storage tier, which is slower performance, but very low cost. So if you're not accessing certain data for long periods of time, it can be moved to the capacity pool. It gives a lot more capacity, and it really allows you to have a small, high-speed SSD tier for the high performance, and that overall does save costs significantly. So when the blocks are not being used, they're moved to the capacity tool. When they need to, they're moved back. And the performance here is something that is configurable. It's something that can grow. You can change the performance to, you can increase it, you can decrease it. And there is also an extra sort of like booster. There's in-memory cache, which is NVMe cache, which also helps speed up the very highly or very frequently read data. So you can actually reach in very good speeds. IOPS up to 2.4 million, network throughput of 72 gigabits per second, and up to 1 petabyte of storage. So it can be used for small scale, and it can also expand to very large scale and high performance. Now, another thing that is, like I said, there's the performance tier itself. It is elastic. So the performance tier is what you have to be looking at. You can increase it if you need more, higher performance, and then you can decrease it if you're not using that performance. And this is really, I think, over time, if you're monitoring your system, you will be told that how much percentage of your SSD capacity you're using. That's something that is very important to monitor, because if it's filling up very fast, you want to increase it. Or if you're only using a small percentage of it, you want to reduce your costs. So that's it for the theory. That's my part. And then I would like to ask you another poll, which will actually help us with the second part of this session, which is the demo. So my question now is, what's your biggest challenge with cloud storage today? And the answers are either cost optimization, performance consistency, capacity planning, visibility and control, or something else. Like I said, there's no correct answers. It's just what you feel is more important. We'd like to know that so that we can sort of address that in the demo session. So just pick it if you're not sure, then it's fine too. Then we'll look at the results and we'll soon start the demonstration. Okay, the results have come in. Okay, it seems like the most important thing here is cost optimization. And number two is actually visibility and control. And that's interesting. So Luba, it's about cost optimizing the cost, but also the ability to visibility and control, I think, knowing, it's like seeing when you need to change things. So I think that's a very important point. So with that, I think we can move on to the demo. I'm going to stop sharing now so that Luba
Absolutely.
can.
I will say, and Robert, thank you, and thank everybody. There were quite a few questions in the chat regarding how our deduplication and compression works. So maybe we can go over that after the demo
Sure.
and get into a bit more details. But let me share my screen and we'll start the demo. So just like Robert said, I'm going to use the Workload Factory, which is a free service from NetApp that you can use to manage your file systems or your FSX for ONTAP environment, whether you have one or you have a few hundreds of them. Completely free from NetApp and requires no installation. So you can start using it pretty much within a few moments from the registration to start using it. So let's begin. Now, like many of you answered, the thing that you need to do first if you want to manage your cost and performance is you need the knowledge, right? You need to understand how your systems are configured. Are they configured correctly? Do you meet the expectation both in terms of the performance and usage? We all know that when first you deploy an environment, it's more often than not changes throughout time, right? Sometimes an application we thought would be used by certain number of people, suddenly there's many more people who are using that, or they're using it differently. And that in turn obviously affects how systems are behaving and managed. And this is exactly why we created Workload Factory 4. It allows you in a one glance to understand how your system are configured. Are they configured correctly? Is there anything you can do so you can adjust both the configuration in such a way that will reduce the cost and also either not in a way that will not affect the performance, or even in some cases you can change configuration and even improve the performance and the manageability and the functionality of the file system. So let's begin with our view of the system. So first, I actually want to show you something new that we added quite recently. And I'm lucky enough that in my role, I get to work with customers on a daily basis. And in this particular demo, I want to give you a user story of a customer I spoke with about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And this customer has multiple file systems inside AWS over different regions. So what he want to do to understand is whether or not his file systems are configured in such a way that there's no time that they're getting too close to the maximum resources that they have, or are there systems where they can maybe adjust the configuration and they do not need as many resources as were allocated first. And what we did together is first, obviously, he used Workload Factory. And one of the things we have within it is the ability to look at file systems that could be in multiple AWS accounts and multiple regions, which is exactly what the customer had. He looked at the list and he downloaded a file, a report that what the file created. I'll show you one that I've downloaded earlier. It actually shows information on the usage and capacity of the file system, all the file systems within the last 30 days. One of the benefits of using FSx for ONTAP is the fact that it has built-in connectivity to different services within AWS, from CloudWatch for metrics that we're using here to lambdas, other storage options, and many other things. Let me show you how the report looks like and what information you can gather out of that. So obviously there's all the information about the name, the ID, and everything like that. But what the customer that I was working with wanted to know, and what I think could be very, very much relevant to any of you once you either deploy your first file system or if you already have them, is the ability to show how your system is using the allocated resources throughout time. And what we have here is the information how much of the SSD is defined, how much is it used, both in size and also in percentage, and how much data is being tiered to the capacity pool, which is based on the tiering policy that Robert mentioned earlier. On top of that, what we have here, and I think that's one of the nicest thing and additions that we had here, is the ability to see both the average utilization and the peak utilization for the last month for 3 different configurations that you can set for your file system. The first one is the throughput, right? What is the throughput you have defined per file system? What is the average utilization for that? And what was the peak? So you can see, for example, here, uh, how much we're using. Same goes for IOPS, right? So how many operations per second you have, what is the allocation, what is the utilization both on average and in peak, and the same for CPU. Now, this is the type of information that can allow you to make not a guess, but an educated decision over your capacity, your utilization, and whether or not you need to make some adjustment there. Perhaps you can see that one of your system is being uh, used more than others, and that means you need to add additional resources to that. Maybe there's a system that's been over a provision, and maybe you can make adjustment there and save on cost without affecting the performance. So that's the report, and this is exactly what I did with my customer. We reviewed the file system, and he identified that one of their file system had been configured with not enough resources, and he saw that it wasn't just a single thing, but something that he saw throughout the month, and he adjusted the configuration before they got to a stage that the system could not manage all the application that were running on top of it. So after we talked about that, let's see what else you can learn on your file system and what else you can do very quickly to adjust your environment. For this, I'll move here to the dashboard view. And this once again allows me to choose which file system or the location of my file systems and give you an overview on how well it is configured. So today, because today's session is focused on performance and cost, I won't go over all of this, but just so you know and be familiar with, and like Robert said, we have other sessions in this series where we talk about other abilities of FSx for ONTAP, things like data protection, migration, and more. And all of this information is available for you here. But for today's session, let's talk about capacity, right? Whenever you define a file system, you define it with the size you think would be best suited for that file system in the long term. But we all know that sometimes things are changed, right? The system is more utilized than expected, sometimes less. With this system, you're able to see whether or not there's a potential saving for your environment, and perhaps you can reduce the size of your file system and still maintain all the performance in an easy way. So let's go that. You can see here I have a file system that is set with 6 terabytes, but I'm not using it for full capacity. I'm only using it close to 50%, let me show you how quickly and easily you can adjust the capacity for this file system. So if I'll click here on continue, you'll be able to see that I can go ahead and adjust the number of the provision capacity that I want. Let me reduce it to 5 for now, and I'll click on apply. And behind the scenes, Workload Factory will run AWS APIs to reconfigure this file system and readjust it. What I did here and what I show you here is a reduction. Of course, you can also do the opposite and increase the capacity of the file system if needed. Let's do it again. So I'll go to another file system, and you can see I have here a file system that has that is over 80% used, and I can go into that and I can increase the capacity. Now let's do it like this, for example, and that is it. Very quickly, very easily, you can see that I had both all the information I needed in terms of what is being used, how much free space I have, and I had the option to reconfigure that based on the requirements of my environment. Now that we did it, I want to show you some other functionalities you can do with FSx for ONTAP using Workload Factory that are obviously related to optimization and cost. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to look at a specific file system, and I'm going to look here at the volumes of these file systems. Before I'll do that, just a quick overview. You can see here we have information on the CPU utilization and the latency of this file system for the last 7 days. So again, we're collecting information directly from CloudWatch and showing you here so you'll know how your system is being used throughout time. And if I'll go here to the volume view, I want to show you some of the features that Robert discussed and explained during our session. So one of the things he mentioned is the efficiency, right? The ability of FSx for ONTAP to identify whether you have multiple blocks that are essentially the same, where the duplication can be beneficial, whether there's a way for us to use compression and compaction to even reduce the data that's been written on the disk even more. And here you can see exactly this information in a very clear view. So we have here, for example, a particular volume. You can see that it sets what the size of it, how much of the data is being written. You can see this is the dark blue, but actually used data is very small. And that is thanks to all the deduplication and other efficiencies. And we'll be able to see here in our view of SSD efficiencies that in this case, we achieved a very high efficiency. The number is not something that's guaranteed. Obviously, it does change based on the type of data you have there. Some data is more flexible, let's say this way, or more compactable, and so on. And by the way, this is my demo environment, so you can see the information. It keeps being updated. Obviously, in your environment, it will be static, but this is our demo environment, so numbers are changing, but same idea behind is available. What else we can do? Now, as Robert mentioned, one of the features that we have in our system is the ability to define the tiering policy, right? A tiering policy is one of the most useful features to keep costs low while make sure your performance remain intact. And this is the ability to identify automatically data that is not being used and send it and to be saved on a lower cost option from the storage perspective. So this is something you can look and see whether or not your current configuration is set up as you want, or maybe you need to change it. For example, in this case, we have a volume where the current tiering policy is set to balanced with 31 days, which means if a certain data is not been touched after 31 days, it will be moved to the capacity tier, less expensive. And we all know that many cases, whenever data is being written, more often than not, it's probably not going to be touched, right? So there's no point of saving it on the SSD and you move it away. It's very simple to change it, right? And let's say, for example, you have a change in the usage of that specific volume, and you even can change the configuration, cost optimize all, and make all the data being to be saved on the capacity tier. Or, for example, if you have data that is more, let's say, things like databases, for example, right? Data that is more, you do not want to send this data away. You want to make sure all the data is available for you um, on the SSD tier, right, for low latency workloads, like, as I said, databases and so on. You can simply go ahead and change it and reconfigure that and meet your business needs, even if those are changing over time. That's all you need to do. Never even have to go to a CLI to adjust it. So we'll let
Okay.
it run.
Yeah, there was actually a question about whether the
Perfect.
snapshots are on the capacity tier or performance tier. And again, like as you
Excellent.
showed, it's
Yes.
configurable.
Yes, absolutely. So that's configurable. Usually, whenever a file volume is defined, and it is defined with a 5% the reservation for the snapshots, but you can define them as well differently, like just Robert said. So we can, for example, move all the data, including the snapshots, to the capacity tier. If you want, you can save them on the SSD itself. It's completely flexible, depends on what you want and what you can use or how you're using it. For example, if I'll go here for this volume, I actually can click here on Manage Snapshot, and I'll be able to see all the snapshot I have in my volume. It doesn't matter if they were created manually, by a policy, by some other application or anything like that. You'll be able to see all your snapshots that are defined for that particular volume. You can manage the snapshots directly from here, from deleting them. If you have snapshots that are no longer relevant, maybe some older snapshots, or just a snapshot that you don't want anymore. Or if you do need a snapshot, because obviously a snapshot here, one of its features is for restoring purposes, you can even restore it, or you can access that as well, everything directly from here. You get all the information you need to be able to manage your data. And if speaking about customers, I had another customer that one of the things he was doing manually until we introduced this functionality inside Workload Factory, he was going volume by volume and identifying all the snapshot that they had, try to identify the bigger one that should have been deleted. And with this tool, he was able to very quickly identify where he had more snapshots than needed and removing them. And it also helped them to manage and identify the snapshot policy. By the way, again, something you can do from here. You can go ahead and create a new snapshot policy based again exactly your needs, whether you want to save the data or take the snapshot hourly, once a week, once a month. How many copies do you want to keep? Do you want to make them immutable, which means they cannot be deleted? Very flexible, based again on what your requirements are, whether they're coming from the company, from the government, from internal, external, all those things, and you can manage it directly from here very quickly and very easily. I'll go back to my volumes here. You'll be able to see, again, not just my list of volumes, but also here on the protection level, you'll be able to see whether or not you have a snapshot policy defined per volume, and if you have some immutability, which means it cannot be deleted, and more.
Luba, by the way, we've
Mhm.
got a really lot of questions coming in. Um,
Excellent.
So yeah, maybe we should start addressing them just really.
Sure,
I don't know if
sure.
we can cover all of them now,
Absolutely.
and I'm really happy that there's a lot of interest here, and I think that we should probably schedule more sessions like this so that
Hmm.
there'll be more chances to learn about this. But
Yes.
some of the questions I think that maybe are worth also sharing with
Hmm.
everyone here um, about. Well, yeah, I mentioned the one about the snapshots.
Yeah,
There
I
was
can
a
see a
question.
question about, yeah, go ahead.
Well, regarding Gen 1 and Gen 2, so there's a
Yes.
move now from the older
Hmm.
generation to a newer generation, and there was a question specifically that I answered about shrinking. If you're a shrinking SSD, that is available on currently on Generation 2.
Gen 2.
But then if there's a question about moving from Gen 1 to Gen 2
Mhm.
volumes, if it's supported or you need to do it manually. So it is, correct me if I'm wrong, it is a manual process. It's not something that is done just really by
You're completely right. Yeah, it is something that is manual. You need to define the Snap Mirror is a good way to do it, to move data from existing file systems to a new file system. And
yeah.
it is a manual process, although you have tools like Workload Factory where you can just simply configure and just define that in one action that all the volumes will be replicated from one file system to another. So it's not complex to do that. I do encourage, if you do have this requirement, to talk to your account team. They will help you set it up. They will help you define what your needs are and how to do it in the best possible way that meets your requirements.
Yeah, there was also a question about the licensing. I'm assuming this is about Workload Factory, whether it's volume
So
provision. So it's basically a free, it's a free
completely free. Doesn't matter if you have one file systems or hundreds, and we have customers that have, everything between one or even before in planning to multiple. This is a tool we give free. If you're already familiar with NetApp, you might have been familiar with our what used to be called Blue XP console that now is called NetApp console. So this functionality of Workload Factory is also available as an integrated service within the NetApp console. And as I said, not only free, does not require any installations, right? You don't need to deploy any servers or something like that. To use that, we simply use AWS APIs, and where needed, we also use our ONTAP API to manage some additional things, but nothing is installed. All we need is permissions, and for the more complex actions that require direct access to the ONTAP, like managing snapshot, we just deploy a Lambda, which is a very small service inside AWS. And again, I think it just shows how well FSx for ONTAP is connected to all the different services within AWS. So we were able to utilize the Lambda functionality to connect to your file systems in a secure way with minimal requirements.
yeah.
I see a question here. If my primary volume get deleted or corrupted, the volume can be restored via snapshot also, where snapshots are get saved on a volume on either S3 bucket or FSx volume. Excellent question. And let me talk about it. So essentially, when you create a snapshot, it will be saved on the original volume where it was created from. And it can be used, obviously, for restoring. And by the way, NetApp snapshot has the functionality to, or the ability to do restoration in different levels from a file, right? So you can restore a single file or files from the volume to a LAN to the full volume size. You can, and we have customers that do that as well for additional protection, especially again, if there's a corruption on the specific volume. You can take the snapshot and actually save it in a different location on a different file system. This depends on your requirements, the type of system you are using, your data protection strategies. Again, we'll be happy to assist if there's any specific questions, and your account teams, whether in AWS and NetApp, will help you to define the requirements or the configuration that needed. But excellent questions, and the answer is yes, you can do the restoration from a snapshot, and you can decide if you want to move or copy this snapshot to a different location that is not the original file system.
Yeah, and there was just a quick
Mhm.
question about the color codes of the volumes, blue and purple. So
Oh,
if
yeah.
you when you see that, if you actually put your mouse on the
Mhm.
the colors, then you get it detailed. So you don't have to remember the
Exactly.
colors. You get
No,
a
no, no, no
detailed
need to
breakdown.
remember anything, and we don't have a test, not here and not later. No worries about that. So the idea is here, I'll just go over this so you can see. So gray is what is the size that's been defined for this volume. The dark blue is how much data is actually being written to. The lighter blue is how much data is being used on the SSD after the efficiencies. And the purple one is how much data is being moved tiered to the capacity pool.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we have to start wrapping up.
Yeah.
Although I'm really happy for all these questions
Mhm.
and we will try and
I saw another question, if you don't mind, Robert. There's a
sure, sure.
question here about the analytics of the data that's stored on the volume, whether that's video, PDF, and so on. So you can't do it with Workload Factory, but NetApp does have tools that can do it. There's a service name classification that can do just that. You can look at the data and identify not just what type of data you have there in terms of like I said, the format of the data, but also uh, how many people access it and who has access to the file and how long has it been since it's been accessed, are there any duplications and more. So we have other tools at NetApp that are available for you to manage your information and understanding more on the type of data you do have stored there.
Yeah. So I yeah,
Yeah.
so I think we have to wrap up now
Mm-hmm.
and I think we do have if you can see the screen now, the resources we have been publishing a lot of short demo videos on YouTube. So if you look for the Workload Factory demos on YouTube, there's a link here. We'll share the links with you. We'll share this information with you. But I do encourage you to watch these because these are really, they focus on each one of the different features and it shows a demonstration in Workload Factory. So a lot of the questions could be answered there. And there's also a lot of resources here, blogs and documentation, and obviously you can contact us and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
There's another question there, Robert, that
Yes,
I do want to answer. Does Workload Factory support move data from on-premises to FSX? Yes, it does
yes.
support it, both between FSX systems that are, FSX to FSX, but also from on-premise to FSX. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you
and
for
this is
this
actually
question.
important because you can't really do that with the AWS console.
Mhm,
So it can discover, you can actually see the systems you have on premises, and then you can copy, replicate, or mirror
mhm.
volumes directly from on premises to FSX for ONTAP, really, which really makes it a lot easier when you have data that you want to sort of like create a hybrid connection or even migrate them to AWS.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this has been a really great session. I enjoyed all the questions. I think it's obviously an interesting topic, and anything we
Mhm.
can do to help you save costs and improve performance, we're happy that we can do that. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time and for your attention. And thank you very much to Luba for the great demonstration. I think that really shows how things look in real life and not just on slides. Um, and we're looking forward to seeing you in future webinars. So please stay tuned and we'll be having more sessions like this about the different topics. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.